Growing up, my father read the Christmas story from Luke 2 in the King James Version every Christmas Eve. Its traditional language is well ingrained in my personal memory and in our culture's memory. My father has a rich radio voice. He used to work in radio, and I can still hear him intoning. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Many other fathers have read this story to their children at Christmas over the centuries. And that simply has to be why this chapter of the King James, Luke 2, has more than its fair share of famous phrases. Of the house and lineage of David, great with child, wrapped him in swaddling clothes. There was no room for them in the inn. It also carries a famous phrase in Luke 2:13-14 that I'll bet you have been misunderstanding. In my terminology, a false friend. Can you find it? And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." The false friend is host. Host today, to many readers, means something different than it did in 1611 in a context like this one, even though, unlike nearly all my other false friends, many contemporary translations also use this word here. I'm going to talk you through the linguistic details, and we're going to land on some Bible study nuggets at the end, some devotional thoughts. I've got to take you through somewhat dry territory, but we'll end up in the mountains of God's glory, I promise. Now please, pause the video and tell me what you think host means in a context like this one, Luke 2:13. I'll wait. Okay, I asked this question on Facebook, and it was a true delight to have so many friends chiming in. As of last count, I had around 300 comments, including some of my own, of course. But if you were one of those hundreds of friends, you might be wondering what gives, because I didn't ask about host in that post. I asked about multitude. I'll tell you the thing that gives. I've realized after a lot of this kind of word work, the same thing that psychologists have realized. When you observe something, you change that thing. Every time I ask people what a word means in the King James Version, they either clam up because they don't want to look dumb, or they think too hard because they don't want to get it wrong. I have found it very difficult to get access to what people think when they're not thinking about their thinking. If you want to know people's unself-conscious reaction to something, the very worst thing you can do is ask them to be conscious of that something. So I employed classic psychological misdirection. I wanted to know how people understood host, so I asked them this. What does multitude mean in the KJV phrase? And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host. I did try to nudge everybody on Facebook to make sure that they gave me enough information to go on. I added, it would help if you just put that whole last phrase in your own words. What is a multitude of the heavenly host? It's really important that you give me your initial unself-conscious answer. And the responses started pouring in. Initial unself-conscious answers are very popular on Facebook. Everybody got my stated question right, too, though plenty of people thought there must be some hidden meaning I was seeing. Nope, multitude means the same thing today that it meant in 1611. I feel awkward about my deception and mildly apologetic, even if it was for your own linguistic good, but I think I got what I needed, and the ends justify the means. Because though I recognize that this is still not quite scientific, a lot of my commenters gave evidence that, to them, a host was just like a multitude. It means a whole big group of something. When I pressed for details with a few people, 10 or 15, I heard this quite a number of times. I asked this question at church, too, which I've never done before, but I was determined to get as big a sampling as I could in the short time that I had available. I got one perceptive answer from a young lady who noted that the host of heaven can mean the sun and moon and stars. The predominant answer at church, though, came from people who assumed that host means a whole lot of something. That's what my highly intelligent wife thought too. And I want to be clear, that is precisely what I myself always assumed when my dad read it until a few short years ago. I do not think you are dumb if you got this wrong. But a few commenters did notice that it was a little odd to say that there was a multitude of the heavenly whole lot of something. Why do you need to say multitude and host? Aha. I hope you're dying to know what host means in this passage. Let's dig in. Host is the 50th and final false friend in a series that I'm now calling, cleverly, 50 False Friends. Those who have been with me from the bitter beginning know what we gotta do now. We start with step 1. noticing a possible false friend. In other words, again, a misleading mismatch between Elizabethan English and our English. There's nothing in the context of this passage in Luke 2 in the King James or any other translation that uses host to make me think heavenly host meant anything in 1611 or today that is different from what it means today, except that subtle possible tautology, that odd repetition with the word multitude. Indeed, the phrase heavenly host is still common because the Christmas story is. And many contemporary English translations still use the words heavenly host. But our first hint that we might have a false friend is that a number of modern translations do use a different word here, the excellent Net Bible, N-E-T, whose notes are exceptionally rich. I highly recommend this as a study Bible. That they speak of a heavenly army instead of a heavenly host. So does the popular New Living Translation, which points to the armies of heaven. And a noticeable minority of my Facebook commenters also used the word army in their responses, including my favorite theologian John Frame, who I am still amazed is my Facebook friend at all. Why do most translations say host, and yet a few trustworthy and well-respected ones say army instead? There's no difference in the Greek manuscripts, but there is an answer. If you've watched my channel much, you already know the answer. But here to tell you all about it anyway is a random brown-haired child off the street, or rather off the hallway, which is kind of like a street.
Here's the deal. A secret conspiracy of bad people who wish to make many, many monies are secretly conspiring to change the Bible to make a bad Bible. Have you ever noticed that the word holy has been taken off the front of the Bibles and replaced with new and improved or worse? 25% off! Well, it's internet truth. Those bad people have to leave enough of the words in the Bible the same in order to fool you, but they quietly change hosts to armies because, just give me a minute. I'm sure I can think of a good reason. I mean, bad reason, because bad people are bad, if I didn't already mention that.
No. That was an unreliable and unaccredited opinion. A conspiracy theory, frankly. I must stop asking for random opinions from hall urchins. No, there's a good reason why some new translations say army instead of host. And for that good reason, let's turn to step 2. Let's check our responsible original language lexicon, BDAG. BDAG gives us an unqualified and clear answer. The Greek word here in Luke 2:13 that the King James translates host means army. And that helps us right away because now we don't have a tautology in the text. Suddenly there was a multitude from the heavenly army. That makes good sense. The Greek word shows up many times meaning army in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was done before Christ, but it appears only one other time in the New Testament, in Acts 7:42. This is Stephen's great speech explaining the history of Israel, and he tells his angry listeners who are just about to stone him to death that after the Israelites worshipped the golden calf in Exodus 32, God turned away and gave them over to worship the host of heaven. In other words, he let them engage in degrading worship of the sun, moon, and stars. And here it gets interesting, which is really saying something because I'm sure you're on the edge of your lazy boy already. Because our responsible original language lexicon says that the English word host is the best one to choose here in Acts 7. The Israelites were not worshiping the army of heaven. They were worshiping the large group of stars and other bright lights in the heavens, the host. But Luke 2:13 appears to be talking about armies of angels. That's what BDAG says, and that's what makes the most sense in context. This host sings or speaks, glory to God in the highest. So why do the King James Version, and in the case of this one false friend, multiple contemporary translations still use the word host? We need to go to step 3 in my false friends process, which is to look up our English word in contemporary English dictionaries to find out what host means today. And here's where we run into a problem that will at first seem like a solution. The American Heritage Dictionary and Merriam-Webster both say that host can mean army in today's English. Army is the very first sense offered by my Merriam-Webster. This is a solution, right? Now we all know what the English word host really means, and it fits the Greek perfectly. Why am I complaining? Well, I'm just not seeing it. I have to disagree with these two dictionaries. When's the last time you heard someone use the word host to mean army? This brings me back to you Facebook commenters. Why is it that out of the hundreds of contemporary English speakers I surveyed, both on Facebook and elsewhere, unscientifically I admit, only a small percentage used the word army in their explanation of that phrase? And not a few of those people were seminary trained. And when I contacted a number of those who used the word army in their explanation, most of them told me that they didn't know until seminary that heavenly host meant heavenly army. They had to be taught what this English word really means. This, by the way, is what I would say. We all thought host meant large group until a teacher disabused us of our hall urchin notions. But if lots and lots of people, intelligent people, my Facebook friends, don't know that host really means army, does it actually mean army? No. Words mean what people use them to mean. You are not dumb if you didn't know that host really means army. Neither was I when I didn't know it. A translation that is published but fails to communicate is not really a translation. And the dictionaries I've mentioned are no solution here. Who's going to look up host when they have no reason to doubt that they already know what it means? Because the sense they know works just fine in the context. That's what a false friend is. Let me pile on a little evidence that these two dictionaries are behind the times, not so much wrong as dated. Do you know that there are free tools today to help us figure out what other people are likely to mean when they use a word? You can do the work of the lexicographers behind your dictionary. You can use a linguistic corpus and just look for yourself at how people use host. I did this in a contemporary corpus, one using billions of English words from recent years, and after looking through hundreds of examples of host, I couldn't find even one in which host meant army. They were nearly all about hosts of radio or TV shows, or hosts of athletic events. Occasionally, there were references to hosts of reasons why such and such was the case, but host was never used to refer to armies in contemporary English examples. Then I looked at the corpus of historical American English. It collects English usage from much older texts. I looked up hosts in writings from the 1810s. I saw very few hosts of guests, and of course, no hosts of radio or TV shows. But I did see lots of references to hosts of Cossacks invading villages. In other words, armies. As I said in my book, Authorized, where I discuss this word briefly, the vernacular changes. You can't stop it any more than those poor villages could stop the mighty Cossacks. My hypothesis at this point is that host used to mean army, but no longer means this in contemporary English. I left my favorite contemporary English dictionary for last in this step 3. The New Oxford American Dictionary, standard on every Mac, confirms that the meaning army has moved to the edges of the language. It marks this sense as archaic. The noad actually has a separate sense for heavenly host as an idiom, a figure of speech, a phrase that carries meaning by itself. It explains it as a literary or biblical term for the angels. But that makes host a holdover missing its original meaning, like the word kith in the phrase kith and kin. The word kith sticks around because of the alliteration, but it's meaningless. And when I turn to step 4, namely checking the massive and expensive Oxford English Dictionary to see the history of our word host, I see my hypothesis doubly confirmed, and I find out what's going on linguistically here. The OED says that host once meant an armed company or multitude of men, an army. But it says that sense is now archaic and poetic. Was the Greek word here in Luke 2:13 archaic and poetic? Not at all. It was the standard word for army. The 20-volume Oxford English Dictionary, this one's a 2-volume because it puts 8 pages on a spread, if you can see that. This dictionary, though, because it has far more space to work with than desk dictionaries, gives more helpful information. It shows that what always happens in language did in fact happen with this word host. The literal meaning became a metaphor. Sense 2 in the OED is transferred, a great company, a multitude, a large number. In other words, when people wanted a word for a large number of something, they called it an army of ants, an army of shoppers, an army of accountants. What's so fascinating to me is how many languages this very thing happened in. In German, as in English, Heerscharen, which I hope I pronounced correctly, army is a standard metaphor. Armies of yodelers descended upon the Reichstag. The Italian word for army, esercito, you have to say it like this, which is the word all my Italian Bibles use in Luke 2:13, can also mean mass, multitude, or horde. All my French Bibles use troop or army in Luke 2:13, and in French, the word can be a metaphor too. And in Hebrew itself, the standard word for armies, a word many of my listeners will know, sabaoth, because the King James uses it twice in the New Testament, can mean large numbers of something. This basic pairing of a literal army with a figurative mass or horde or large amount of something is extremely ancient. and it exists both inside and outside of the Indo-European language family that English is a part of. But in English, our word host has gradually lost its double meaning. It no longer actually means the literal army. That sense is archaic or literary. In other words, most people don't know it or use it. So it is possible that host in heavenly host is used metaphorically to name a large number of angels, and I don't normally like to conclude that major modern evangelical English translations are wrong. There are good reasons why many modern translations went for host here. It's traditional. It sounds good because of the alliteration with the two H's, heavenly host. It avoids specifying whether the angels were an army or just appearing in large numbers. There's an ambiguity there that it retains. And in 1611, this was especially a good choice. Back then, the word host was much more readily known to mean both army and a whole lot of something. But given that the sentence in Luke 2:13 already includes the word multitude, and given that, and you can read Mike Heiser's book on angels to see far, far, far more about this, it seems important to God to call himself the Lord of armies. I prefer the Net Bible's rendering here. Suddenly, a vast heavenly army appeared with the angel, praising God. A few translations like the CEB and NIV have found ambiguous words like heavenly forces and company, which have military overtones of varying strength. Those are good choices too, I think. But I think it's easiest to stick with heavenly army. This is basically what Tyndale and the Geneva Bible did before the King James. They both went for heavenly soldiers. The Latin Vulgate has heavenly army. I nearly never in this 50 False Friends series go against the judgment of as many evangelical scholars as I am today. I'm saying that heavenly host has lived out its useful life as a traditional rendering of the key phrase in Luke 2:13. My King James only brothers often complain about what they feel are needless changes in the modern versions. Sometimes, however, changes are needed, and they are not made. Translators stick with tradition, the King James tradition, even when they don't really have to. So what? Why does this matter? Let's camp out on the truths in this passage, Luke 2. When you start digging into apparently minor statements in the Bible, heavenly host, you are liable to uncover something much deeper. I love Bible study for this reason. And here's what I've uncovered. The Lord has angel armies. And this is supposed to both awe and comfort God's children. One thing that I find interesting and comforting about this somewhat obscure but also pretty common biblical phrase, the heavenly host, or the Lord of hosts, is precisely that I know so little about what it means. As I dug into this famous phrase, the Lord of hosts, I found that scholars are divided over what it means. Is it that the Lord is the head of an angel army, or that he is Lord over the heavenly bodies, like the sun and moon, or that he is Lord of Israel's army? In Genesis 2, the Bible even refers to the creation with this word. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. The Hebrew word for host or army gets used in all these ways. And I'm comforted to know that the Lord is Lord over all these things. He stands at their head and can marshal them to his purposes. He can deploy the sun to stand still in order to help his Israelite army, and the sun says, "Yes, sir." He can position 10,000 angels to free the son from the cross, or not, as he chooses. He can muster a myriad of angels to go sing to a small group of shepherds to celebrate the birth of the Messiah, and not one of them questions his judgment or tries to countermand his order. The Lord is surrounded by glorious angels in Isaiah 6 who cry, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord." He rides on powerful angels in Ezekiel 1. My pastor just preached on this. It was glorious. And he's worshipped by them in Revelation. His angels never draw attention to themselves or permit themselves to be worshipped in the Old Testament. They always refuse it. They point always to the source of their power and glory. God could do all he does with the word, with no intermediaries. He doesn't need helpers, but he has them. He created them, and he commands them. And when God's prophet is wondering where the help of the Lord is in a time of trouble, his eyes are open to see the ranks of angels surrounding him. And when Joshua is about to begin the bloody conquest of Canaan, he is forced to bow before the commander of Yahweh's army, a higher army, a perfect army, of which the Israelite army is a mere shadow. I'm a classic guy. I play sports, and I play to win. I carry a knife. I daydream sometimes like men do about being invincible. What would I do if I were? But the angel of the Lord actually is invincible. Just one of God's angels can destroy countless Egyptian firstborns, or countless sinning Israelites in another passage, until God tells him to stay his hand. I am still processing what Mike Heiser's unseen realm means and how persuaded I am by all the individual arguments and claims he makes. I'm not convinced of every point. I'm still in a listening mode, which he has well earned, but which is going to take me a while. But one thing he has done for me is just remind me that there is an unseen realm that the Bible cares to reveal glimpses of. And in the Christmas story, we all get a glimpse. The curtains are drawn back, and we see the angel armies and the Lord above them. In my distress, I call upon the Lord. To my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked. The foundations also of the mountains trembled and quaked because he was angry. He bowed the heavens and came down. Thick darkness was under his feet. He rode on a cherub, an angel, and flew. He came swiftly on the wings of the wind. He sent from on high. He took me. He drew me out of many waters. He rescued me from my strong enemy and from those who hated me, for they were too mighty for me. Merry Christmas, and watch for a wrap-up video on my 50 False Friends series in which I answer 10 objections to it, coming to a YouTube near you.